Hello and welcome to my second JavaScript tutorial, and in this video we'll go through the different data types in JavaScript, being able to use variables and also using Console.log. So to start, in JavaScript there are essentially 6 basic data types, and just to make things easier, if you're coming from another programming language such as Python, you might be familiar with integers and floating point. However, in JavaScript they're both numbers. So just to explain, let me just make a comment, and I just want to say that 55, let's say, is a number, and so is 55.5. In Python, 55 would be classed as an integer since there is no decimal point, and 55.5 would be a floating point. However, in JavaScript we make no distinction between them. The second basic data type are strings. Strings are just words and or characters which can be put within quotes. So for example, JavaScript is a character, and also just J itself is a character, but it is a string. However, a string should not be put outside of quotes, such as JavaScript, or just Java, let's say. That is not a string because it's not put within quotation marks. Another data type is Boolean. This can take in two values, either true or false, which can mean yes or no. I mean, we'll go through it in a later video maybe when we go through if-else statements. However, just know that Boolean only takes in two values, which is true or false. There are two more data types after this, and that's null, which means that there is nothing or it's unknown, and undefined, which means that value isn't really assigned to a variable. And just to end it off, these are the general primitive data types, which is data that have no objects or no methods, and you shouldn't really worry about it right now. Another data type you should be aware of are objects. Right now I'll just summarize this, but they're just kind of similar to lists in the way that you put them in curly brackets, and you can have a few parameters within them, but I think this is quite special and it should be put aside for a later video. So now I'll just show you what Console.log is. So Console.log is a way of being able to essentially just log your stuff to the console with whatever you put within these brackets. So this is a function that you call, and let's say whatever you put, let's say a string, number, or variables that we'll just talk about in a minute or so, will be literally just almost copied and pasted to the console. And the way you access a console is by, let's say, going to Finder, or if you're on, just the equivalent of Finder in Windows, and let me just try and find where this folder is. So my folder is here, and what you want to do is just open index.html and open it with Google Chrome. So it's my default anyway, and let me just resize this. Whoops. So the way you access your console is by right-clicking on your empty HTML page and just clicking inspect, and then you are greeted with this page, and then you just want to click console. So the console, let's say we console log something here, so we want to console log JavaScript as we used in our previous example, and you want to save this in VS Code. Then you want to refresh your HTML page. Then it appears here, JavaScript. Literally what we wrote within these console log is almost like printing it to the console. So exactly what we wrote, JavaScript, is appearing in the console pretty much. So let's have a few examples. If you want to console log 55, for example, save, refresh, it appears here. So as I also said, if you, let's say, write a string without quotation marks, let's say JavaScript, an error will appear in the console. So let me just refresh it. Uncaught reference error. JavaScript is not defined. This is because it's not put within quotation marks and it's not being passed along as a string. So we just save it, refresh it, and now it appears. So what I want to go through now is being able to store things like strings, numbers, maybe boolean, and very rarely we'll use null or undefined, and we want to pass those and being able to access them using variables or constants. So very briefly in this video, I'll just show you how to assign a variable to, let's say, a number or a string. So let's say we want to have a number and we want to call it num, and this num will hold a certain value. Let's say that certain value is 7, which is my favorite number, to be fair. And what we do is, this is the syntax: let num equal 7. So what happens here is that 7 is now stored in this num, which we just called it. It can be anything you want to call it. It can be num, it can be 7. It should really be obvious to what it's storing. So since we're storing 7, let's say, to make it shorter, let's say 7. And now what this is storing, actually let me just change it to num, I don't really like that. So now num is holding 7. So now when we console log, so now instead of console logging 7, which then if you refresh, it appears as 7 in the console. Instead of doing that, what we can do is, without quotation marks, since this is an actual JavaScript variable, we can just write num in the console log, brackets, and then save it and refresh. Just pause for a moment here. What do you think it will return? So now let's refresh. It returns 7. So as you can see, wherever we hold and wherever we hold in the variable is console logged over here. So let's say we want to try another variable name, string equal, let's say JS is my favorite language, and let's console log this, str. Now refresh the index.html. It now comes up as JS is my favorite language. So now that we've gone through variables, as I just said before, we can call the variable name anything. However, there are a few lists of reserved words which we can't use as variable names because they're used by JavaScript itself. For example, let's say we want to call this class. This will return an error because class is a reserved word, such as let, return, and also function. So just refrain from using those words, and if you ever get an error, just change the variable name and just don't worry about it. Alright guys, that's it for this second JavaScript tutorial. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next video. See you.